Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen. This week we are doing another movie review. This is Deep Red, or Profondo Rosso, or The Hatchet Murders, whatever you want to call it. So the film was released back in 1975, the year I was born, no less. And the film was co-written and directed by the legendary Dario Argento. And this is certainly hailed as one of his masterpieces, and I can't argue with that. It certainly is. Definitely one of my favorite films in his canon. So the film begins with, we see this weird, dream sequence of these two, shadowy figures on the wall. And we see the silhouette of someone about to get stabbed with this huge butcher knife. And we hear this child screaming out. And then we see the knife drop on the floor, and we see the child's legs. And we can tell it's a child because it's like an old Catholic school uniform. And that's how the film begins. And of course we know these events are going to be prevalent as the story unfolds, and it certainly does. And then we meet this young man, Marcus Daly, who's played by David Hemmings in the film. And Marcus is a local jazz musician. And him and his friend Carlo, who's like this drunken dude, who's also in the band with him. And they happen to witness a murder taking place. And the woman who is murdered is called Helga, and she happens to be a psychic medium. And we see her at the beginning throwing this big presentation in front of a huge audience in this auditorium. And we see her talking about her powers, basically, and her abilities. And she starts to freak out. And she gets a premonition during the show. And the premonition is that she thinks there's a killer in the audience there with them. And guess what? She is right. And we see the killer, and we see the camera work is from the killer's perspective. As in many of Dario Argento's films. And we see the camera pull up, and we can tell it's someone getting up from the audience, turning around, and walking out the building, So we know, obviously, the killer is there, watching. And then we see later on, the next scene is from Helga's apartment building. And she's a very beautiful young woman, blonde woman. And the killer strikes. The killer takes Helga out with a hatchet, a huge meat cleaver, and it's so brutal. The scene is so vicious and mean-spirited. And we see the killer get her right in her shoulder with the hatchet, and it's nasty. And like I said, it's very mean-spirited, and we see the woman on the floor, and she's crawling for her life, and as the hatchet keeps coming down on her, And then we see Marcus Daly happens to catch the woman and sees her in the window as the woman gets up and crawls towards the window, and bam, the glass shatters and the hatchet comes down on her once again, and she falls on the glass shard right on her neck and dies right there. And then Marcus sees it all happen, from the street. He's hanging out on the street with his buddy Carlo, and he sees the woman in the window. And that woman just happens to live in his same apartment complex. So he goes and runs into the apartment trying to help her, because I guess the door is open. And he finds the woman there dead, he pulls her body down. And as he does that, he takes a look out the window and sees this shadowy figure of a man in the dark with a long dark jacket and a fedora hat, going off into the night, Well, he doesn't get a good look at him, but so he explains all this to the police, And as he does that, we meet young Gianni from the press, is a reporter, and she tries to take pictures from the scene, and you know, the police are like, get out of here, we don't want the press is not allowed in here. But she does get off a couple of shots, including one of Marcus. And Marcus is not too pleased about this, because his face ends up being in the paper, and all about how he is the only witness to the murder, you know. And he's like, oh great, now the murderer is going to come after me now, because I'm the only witness. And that's exactly what happens in the movie, you know. The killer finds out this, and targets Marcus, you know. And as the film progresses, you know, Gianna feels bad about doing that, and she ends up wanting to try and work with Marcus to try and delve into the murder and try and maybe find out who is the killer, you know. And they try and investigate it. And Marcus himself is very intrigued by this. He wants to find out who the killer is, you know. And so that's what happens all throughout the movie. He's trying to pick up clues here and there. And we do get some good clues. As he was in the apartment, he saw this painting of, it looks like a little kid made it, of a murder scene. And that comes into play, and it's tied to this book, The House of the Screaming Child, which was written by this woman, Amanda Righetti. So Marcus decides he wants to pay this Amanda Righetti a visit, who wrote the book, because he thinks that will give him some more insight to who the killer might be, because the book is actually about a long forgotten murder, you know. So he figures if he questions the author of the novel, that maybe he'll find out a little bit more about who is out there, you know, killing people one by one. And guess what? The killer gets to her first. The killer shows up at the house of Amanda, the author of that book, and takes her out in most gruesome fashion. And it's really drawn out. Again, it's really mean-spirited. The killer gets to her in the house and plays this weird tape of like a children's song, and that's kind of the murderer's calling card, is the murderer leaves these like weird children's dolls hanging by a noose, and it looks like a baby hanging from the ceiling. And the killer also plays an audio tape of this weird children's song, and that's the killer's calling card. And so the killer takes her out, knocks her unconscious with like a bat or something, and then bashes her head against the wall in the bathroom. And you know, it's very drawn out. You see the woman trying to crawl for her life, you know. And the killer decides to start turning on the sink and making it scalding hot. And then the killer also turns on the faucet in the bathtub and makes it scalding hot. And we see the steam rising throughout the room. And the killer dunks her head in the water, in the scalding hot water. And we see her face is like burning and melting, similar to a scene in Halloween 2. So obviously Rick Rosenthal probably got a little influence there. Yeah, and then when the woman finally falls to the ground, we see her face is all beet red and melted. It's nasty. And she tries to make a little message in the wall through the moisture and the mist, you know, to try and write maybe the name of the killer. But as soon as the woman is killed and the killer takes off, that's when Marcus shows up. But you're too late, buddy. She's already dead. You didn't make it. So a couple of times in the movie he shows up like right after the killer has struck, you know. So throughout the films you get little hints to who the killer could possibly be, and we see these weird like visuals of the killer in their lair, and it's all black, and you see a black table with all these weird stuff laid out on the table, like a couple switchblades, a children's doll, And then you see these close-up of the killer's eyeball, you know, putting makeup on, you know. It's really cool. It's really trippy and psychedelic. Really cool. I love that. Argento has such a brilliant style, you know. There's nobody like him. You gotta hand it to him. There's nobody with as much visual flair doing these, like, kind of brutal horror movies, you know. And yeah, so we eventually find out that Carlo is kind of tied to this somehow, his best friend. Because when he finds out that Marcus is investigating the murders, he's like, what are you doing, you know? Why don't you just take Gianni there and go off on a holiday or something? You're getting too involved in this. This is ruining your life, you know? So you're like, it's alluded to that he could possibly be the killer, and it's alluded that a couple of other people could be, you know? And that's the murder mystery element of the film, you know? And of course, eventually you find out at the end the big reveal, and it's really cool. It's very well done, and the film keeps you in suspense all the way, and you're very intrigued the whole time. It's just an awesome movie, and it's certainly one of Dario Argento's best works, for sure. And there's another really cool dream sequence towards the end. I won't give it away because I want you guys to see this film. But it's really cool, really well done, and it's like, once you get that big reveal, it's so cool, you know. I'll just say one thing. It kind of involves the kid that we saw there screaming at the beginning of the film, when the person gets murdered. Yeah, so I highly recommend Deep Red by Dario Argento. And this is a great release from Arrow Video. So if you're going to get any release of this film, this is the one you want to get. This is an excellent release. And there you got the inside cover, which is the classic movie poster. Another fun fact about this film is the killer's hands. You know, you get that traditional black-gloved killer, you know, which is a staple of the Giallo film. Those hands are Dario Argento's. Because he didn't want to hire an actor to do those scenes, because he didn't want to have to take, you know, do take after take, because in actors, you know, they don't always get it right the first time. You got to do take after take. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, so he figured, I'm just going to do it myself and save some money, you know. So it's a nice fun fact for you guys. So guys, that's my review of Deep Red. I highly recommend it. I give it 2 devil horns up, and thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.